Thanks for joining us for That Larimer County Show. Today we'll be talking about the proposed 2013 budget for Larimer County. My name's Deni LaRue, Larimer County Community Information Manager, and my co-host is Neil Gluckman, Larimer County Assistant County Manager. Our guests today are Linda Hoffmann, Larimer County Manager, and Bob Keister, our Budget Director.
It's going to be an interesting show. We're going to talk about the 2013 budget, as you suggested. And one of the things about the budget is that the county manager has to provide a balanced budget to the board by October 15th. And from that point, the Board of County Commissioners becomes theirs, but they have public hearings to get citizen input. But
Email, call,
calls,
right,
hearings, in-person call-ins, just like you said. But before that, there's a bigger part of the budget that's kind of happens way back in about early May, sometimes even before that, where the board has a process where they go through prioritization and other things to develop the budget. So we're going to start at the beginning, and let's start with how does the budget start? What's the very first thing that happens?
Well, with planning a $300 million budget, you have to start early. So we start right after the first of the year and begin a process of looking around us, assessing all of our different services, taking a look at how legislation has changed, what the demand is, and what the priorities are of the community in order to put together a good budget that meets community needs.
And how exactly do you find out what meets community needs?
Well, every 2 years we've been doing a citizen survey, and we ask citizens about the types of services that we provide. We itemize them for them, ask them how we're performing, and how important those are to them. So that boils into the mix of our county commissioners in determining the degree that they want to fund these different services.
So that's all part of what you call the environmental scan, looking around, seeing what's going on and what changes have occurred.
We do an inventory of all of our services, and we have why we do it, what benefits or outcomes come from that service, how citizens feel about that particular service, the degree it's mandated, and the reason that we may be compelled to do it. Later we'll talk a little bit more about the budget. We have a lot of things that we're required to do by statutes or by the federal government. And we also take a look at performance measures and how the service has been performing. And all this goes into the mix to make those decisions about funding levels for the upcoming year.
Now, Linda, you have certain criteria that you use, and the commissioners prioritize their different services. So when you're putting together a budget to recommend to them, what is some of that criteria?
The commissioners have historically looked at a variety of criteria, and this year in particular, they really went back to the core of prioritizing services by the expected impacts of that service on our community, by the effectiveness of the service in our community. As Bob said earlier, kind of whether it's mandated or not, there are things we have to do. So all of that goes into, I guess, the soup of it, and they literally assign prioritization numbers, and then those become the basis of the levels of funding compared to the previous years.
Okay.
So one of the things I think that's on the criteria is the importance of the service to the community, and perhaps how the county delivers that service.
Right.
How does the commissioners measure that?
They have a scale. They have asked for each service. We have a series of questions we answer about each service, and there are various point values for those and weighting factors. And for example, a service that is mandated, one that we must do regardless of how we particularly feel about it, such as elections, such as monitoring the quality of water and air, registering motor vehicles. Those are things that counties do across the whole state, and we really don't have any choice in them. So they actually get weighted highly, and we have to do them.
That's the service, and then there's also the service level.
That's correct.
So Larimer County, our assumption would be that you would want to perform the service at the highest level possible. So you would not want lines or big lines at elections. You don't want a long time to wait for your, the sheriff's deputy to show up at your home if you have an emergency. Is all that taken into consideration?
Yes, they are, and that's the critical balance that the county commissioners and a county manager have to shoot for when they put the budget together. Obviously, we have to provide services of different types, and what you want is something that's efficient, quick, does the job right, and gets it done and is least costly.
And more we'll be relying on our performance measures to give us that information in a very concrete, tangible way. And we can track over time how our performance is measuring up. And in some cases, probably we'll see performance begin to lag, in which case we'll know that we've pulled too many resources away from that service and need to make an adjustment. Or it could be down the road the commissioners will decide, well, that's maybe not as important a service as we thought initially. And so this will give them one more way of making informed decisions on behalf of the public.
One of the ways that Larimer County makes sure that we're making good choices along the level of service and the types of service is we participate in a 10-county, the largest Front Range counties of Colorado. We compare our budgets, some 300-400 items, and we look and see how we benchmark against others that are providing a similar service to make sure that we're doing it well, effectively, and timely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's always interesting to me when Neil was talking about levels of service, something that's mandated, like registering your vehicles that you mentioned, but the time it takes to get that registration, standing in line. We have a high degree of service here at Larimer County, but that does take some support.
And I would like for our performance measures to become more informative to the public. For example, not only is it easier and quicker to renew your registration from home, it's also cheaper for the county. So as we look for ways to reduce our costs, getting that information out to the public and helping them understand the real cost of services will be beneficial for everybody.
So something about efficiency, doing things faster or high level of service might be that it's available on the internet rather than standing in line.
And more we're moving services onto the internet. People expect it, and it is a way of increasing efficiency.
Now, how much is our budget? What's the dollars?
Well, the total budget is around $319 million for 2013.
And if you break that down,
we break it into 7 service categories. We have a category for transportation services. Mostly that's taking care of county roads. Anything that's not a federal highway or a city street or as a state highway, then the county's taking care of it.
Unless it's a private road.
Unless it's a private road, that's right. We also do public safety, and we're part of that chain of events that includes the city policing, the courts, the prosecution, the other services that come with public safety. Our largest role is in operating the single county jail that everybody puts their inmates into, and offering alternative sentencing programs for people that have done something but don't need to be in jail. Then we have general government services and health and human services. Those are the main largest areas. We also have parks and natural resources and support services.
And the money, the funding of those services come from about 3 different real areas, is that correct?
That's the complexity of the budget, because each of these services are financed in a different way. For example, generally health and human service type services are financed by some county participation, but mostly by federal and state funding. Those are done that way across the whole nation.
Bob mentioned that the total budget was about $300 million, and you asked, well, how does that break down? Well, I think another way, an important way of looking at that $300 million is that not all of that is money that is really the true cost of government. Because some of that is money that goes for one-time projects. Some of it is money that, because of the way we do our accounting system, actually gets double counted. Taxpayers want to know where the money comes from and where it goes. So if, for example, sales tax dollars come into one department to be recorded and accounted for and verified that it's correct, and then those sales tax dollars go out to a different department where services are provided with that money, it's counted in both budgets. So even though the overall budget is that $319 million, a more accurate reflection of the cost of Larimer County net operating is what we call our net operating budget, and that's about $222 million proposed for 2013.
I'm going to jump in here for just a minute because we've broached the topic. So $222 million is the money that Larimer County has to work with to provide services. It's our operating dollars. So with that in mind, we talked earlier about that there are several revenue streams for that money. Some of it is earmarked for certain things, some of it's discretionary. So discretionary dollars are the things that you really get to, when you recommend the budget to the commissioners, pick and choose where that operating money goes.
That's right, and one of the biggest sources of revenue for the county is property tax. And I think most people feel like, well, I pay my property tax, and we don't realize that most of that money goes off to school districts and other uses, and only about 25% of it is actually kept by the county government. And then we have the ability to, I think of it as shuffling the cards out. You know, we can distribute that in a way that we think is of best benefit to our citizens, and in many cases that money is matched by money coming in from state or federal sources. So the budget gets really complicated because some departments have those other sources of funding
User
and some of them
fees
don't.
and sales tax.
So are you saying if I pay $1,000 in property tax, only $250 is going to the county for all those services?
That's right.
Yes.
That's
Wow,
correct.
that's
And it's not evenly distributed between the services. For example, most of the parks and open lands and natural resources areas are financed by an open space. So we only put $1 or $2 towards the recreation activities out of that $250 that you pay to the county.
Well, and that's a question from that $222 million operating budget.
Yes.
How much of that is discretionary that we can actually say is not earmarked, that we actually get to choose, the commissioners get to choose?
About $100 million.
Okay.
That's a rounded figure, but most of that is property taxes, and then there's a few other revenue sources that we're allowed to use however we want.
Okay.
That's how much we'll have in 2013. And of course that fluctuates every year, as do all of our funding sources.
So the next big topic I think that we will delve into, I think is very important. You talked earlier about the kinds of things that affect the budget, the major factors out there. So a major factor is this financial cliff that we're facing in 2015. And to give our viewers an idea of why that is, in 2011, the commissioners asked voters to approve some sales taxes to take the place of sales taxes that are expiring in 2015 that will operate the jail. So voters rejected that.
Yes.
Now that those sales taxes are still expiring in 2015, so there's this big financial cliff that's going to occur. And so let's take it from there. That's a major factor affecting the proposed 2013 budget.
Well, and we don't want it to be a cliff in Larimer County.
Okay.
We think that would just be too big of a change all in one year. So what the commissioners have directed is that they want to step down the budget in 13, 14 to hit that low point in 15, because it's easier to manage things over time. We're going to be making a lot of changes in the county, and if that hits all at once, it will be quite disruptive. So just as, you know, if you know that your income and your family is going to be reducing in your future, you don't wait until the last minute to curtail your spending. So the county's doing the same thing.
So I want to make sure I get it right. Back when, more than 15 years ago, the
1997.
okay, the citizens
Yeah.
voted to pay for what we're talking about. They pay for the operation of the jail. They also paid for some buildings, but let's
Right.
take that away. They paid for the operation of the jail. That means deputies to watch the prisoners.
That's correct.
But it was for 15 years. So 15 years goes by, that's 2015 or thereabouts?
17 years, yeah.
Okay. And that money disappears.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
That's correct.
Yes.
And
We have
and
100 employees at the sheriff's office that their wages are dependent upon this going on. So in order to, we can't just stop operating the jail. So
And how much money are we talking about that in operating that we have
differential, yeah.
that we have to come up with?
About $8 million.
About $8 million. Okay.
It'll go away.
And so, and we're doing this 1 year at a time over the next 3 years to try to make this work?
We are. And it's not realistic for all of that money to come out of operating the jail. I mean, we have to have a jail in Larimer County. So what the commissioners have directed is that all of the departments will ratchet back some in order that they can throw those savings into a pot that can be then fed into filling this gap of money that has been used to operate the jail.
And also to put it in perspective, that $8 million is not really $8 million out of the $300 million. It's really $8 million out of the discretionary operating of $100 million.
Right. That's correct.
Well,
That's
so it's
right.
almost 10%.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
a big number.
So we're calling this a glide path. We're gliding down 3 years so that by the time we hit 2015, our budget will be able, able to then operate the jail at that level.
And we're doing that. We're doing the glide path for a variety of reasons. Like I said, if we just lived happy-go-lucky until 2015 and made no change at all, we would be looking at massive change all at once, and that's very difficult to manage. Another reason that the commissioners have directed that we do this glide path is our revenues will be relatively constant in 13 and 14. And so that'll create a little bit of increment, because sometimes you have to spend money to make money. So there are things that we might be able to do as investment proposals. So if we put out a little bit of money to upgrade our software systems or to do things that increase efficiencies in departments, some of those things cost money. And we'll have the money in 13 and 14 to do that, and then by the time we get to 15, we'll be operating more efficiently.
So that's an important concept. It's not all about cuts, it's about efficiencies.
Oh, yes.
And what can we do to do things more efficiently, as we have been doing.
You'll come,
think.
when a person stops by, for example, our courthouse offices, to register their vehicles, they'll now see a big sign outside that says, you can do this online.
Online, yeah.
And there are 300,000 vehicle registrations that have to be renewed each year.
Wow.
And 200,000 come walk up to the courthouse. So if we can switch that around, so it's the other way around, 200,000 are done online, then we can have less staff, really good service, and government becomes less costly. So that's one that may take a few years of people changing their behavior in order to feel comfortable with doing it online.
Now, we would have been in much worse shape if we didn't do something what you're talking about, but this is in criminal justice, is we have something called the ASD, the Alternative Service Unit. And if we didn't have that, we would have many more people going to jail. Now, the price of sentencing someone to jail versus some of the alternative programs is dramatic. Is that not right?
Yes, it is dramatic, and I'm so pleased to be able to quote some of our performance measures, because that's one of the things we've been tracking really carefully. About 48% of the people who are sentenced to some kind of corrective action in Larimer County by our judicial system actually are not sentenced to jail. They're sentenced to some other alternative form of correction, like a weekender program or an ankle bracelet or some kind of direct monitoring. And those programs, compared to jail time, cost the taxpayers about 28%. So for every dollar we spend keeping somebody incarcerated in jail, if we can do corrective behavior in a different way, taxpayers are only out 28 cents because those offenders actually pay part of their cost of their correction action. So it's very beneficial, and Larimer County is a real leader, not only in the state, but our director serves on a national committee to help other communities do with their corrections what we've done with ours.
And alternative sentencing keeps people in the community, tied to the community with jobs and paying their taxes and spending a couple days in and the rest of the time out, so they don't lose those kinds of connections, which is very important to community and to keeping it
and to their
more efficient.
To their behavior following that action, because what we don't want is we don't want a revolving door through that system. We want people to make their corrections, their adjustments, to get some help, to learn new ways of living and to move on into productive citizenry.
So what are some of the big changes in the proposed 2013 budget for this year to reach the levels that we need to reach?
Generally, most of the departments are being asked to cut back in the neighborhood of 3% of their typical operating budget. And so a lot of departments are doing innovative things like Bob was talking about earlier. And another thing that folks are doing is they're simply going to have to budget tighter. We have had places where people were budgeted to spend money. They've done an excellent job of managing their budgets through the year, and then they turn back a little bit at the end of the year. So we're trying to ratchet that down to get people's budgets to match department by department more what they spend.
Mm-hmm.
And then that layer off the top, we can then save to meet that shortfall in 2015.
Now this is what, the third or fourth year of reductions for Larimer County?
We've done 4 years of reductions, and it's primarily because property values have stagnated recently, and in some cases our sales tax has been lower for some areas. And now with this expiring jail sales tax, it exacerbates the problem and makes us continue this very tight budgeting for the next couple of years.
That I would think that would affect services, and I know that the county's getting into performance measurements, but it's kind of this double-edged sword where you're trying to perform well and reduce. How are we doing that? I mean, how is
well, one of the ways that we're helping with that is we've actually put into place a process improvement group who goes in, a group of people with expertise to go into the department and look at re-engineering the processes and the ways they provide service to find better ways to do it in lower cost ways, and that's already starting to have effects. We're also encouraging departments to do investment proposals. In other words, come up with some one-time dollars that you think that you can invest and then therefore save costs. We just recently had one of those proposals in the district attorney's office. It was a $500,000 investment, but it saves us out of operating some $360,000 every year, and had to do with the way court records are shared. It's called the discovery process, and it's part of the records process in the courts. So it was very productive, lowered our costs. We still provide a high level of service.
Another thing that departments are doing is they're actually talking to their customers to find out which services do you value, how can we streamline those services, are there things we're doing that we don't need to do. When the Natural Resources Department did that with their parks. One of the things they found was that people would be willing to pay a little bit more for their permit if their permit was structured in a slightly different way. So they were able to increase value to the public and increase their fee revenue at the same time. And so those are the kinds of win-wins we're looking for, and we'll stretch those as far as we can.
So now if you get your park permit in November, it will go all the way to November instead of running out at the end of December, which people really wanted.
It's a great deal.
Yeah,
and you can also use it in multiple vehicles within your family. And so you don't have to buy one for each vehicle. So the permit is more valuable to people, they're willing to pay a little bit more, and that gives the Parks Department more of their own revenue, so we can pull back some of that discretionary money we've been talking about and move that to other departments.
Okay, so you said, we talked about the 2013 budget. There's a glide path all the way to 2015. So what are the next steps? What's going to happen in 2014 and 2015?
Well, as we wrap up this budget for the 2013 budget, we'll immediately begin our planning process for 2014 and 15. And we're going to have to take a look at some of the things that we're planning. Obviously, personnel costs play a big part of this. We participate in some Northern Colorado compensation and wage surveys to make sure that we're competitive when we offer. We'll have to see how that affects the budget. We're also going to look at additional use of our priorities to shake out what is the most important services that citizens need and expect or must be provided, and then sift down those that are lower priority and possibly eliminate or reduce some of those.
The county's making really innovative advances in things. An example I'll use is this year we're going to a utility model for our fleet services. In the past, the general fund had just funded fleet and then everybody used the vehicles and the cars. But what that does is if you're not paying for the service that you're getting, you can just take the car when you need it. We think that maybe departments will be more frugal in the use of those resources if they're actually paying for them out of their budgets. So this year we've put together a fleet utility where the money will come into the department. The department will essentially rent the vehicle from fleet and pay for that. And then a board will be set up of users, the customer advisory board, to operate the utility, in this case fleet. So we're testing it with fleet this year, and we have plans for moving more of our internal services to that model as a way of, if you're paying for what you use, you may actually use less, and that will reduce our costs.
Shows you the true cost of the service.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Well, a good small example is that we used to just every employee had a computer, and now you have a computer, but your department has to rent that computer.
Right.
So you don't have computers laying around that you're not using,
Right.
because you are renting that as you use it. We're almost done on time-wise here, so we're very short. In 10 words or less, just when will property tax revenues, as they get more stable in the country, when will that benefit the county if property values go up?
Probably not until 2016 for the next major reappraisal.
Okay.
The numbers that we're looking at now put us at a very small growth for 2014. The reappraisals are done every 2 years, and the next ones are 2014 and 16. And we'll probably be relatively flat in our income all the way up to 2016. So we've got to do this for the long haul.
Okay. Okay. So we've got just a few minutes left. Is there anything we want to encourage people? And you can email in your questions, you can call in and make comments. So we would really like people to get as involved as possible in those budget hearings. Anything to add to this?
Would you, all of the budget information is on larimer.org.
Yes.
And there's a link on the home page, or if you go to larimer.org budget, I think you'll find it there.
Okay, yeah, and it's online, which is great. So you can just go scrutinize it and then come ask questions and give your opinion.
I thought this was a very exciting topic. I was kind of thought, how could you make budgets interesting? And
Yes.
I think our two guests really did a good job.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay. And thank you, Neil, of course.
Thank you.
Yes. And thank you for joining us for That Larimer County Show.